everybody. Happy Friday. Of course, the transfer window is officially open. A little bit of delay, though, on our end. A few audio issues there before we started. But we are finally now live and, of course, bringing you Window Watch on the first day of the transfer window. Adam Harvey, of course, joined here by Paddy, Davitt and Seaman to unpack all of the transfer rumours that are currently circulating around Carrow Road. We want your comments, questions, all of that, things of those nature. Get them down in the comment section below. And, of course, we'll come round to those as we work through. Lads, let's talk about Jose Cordoba first and foremost. We've spoken a lot about him, so we maybe won't go into the details of him as a player. But, of course, the transfer window's open. He's been unveiled. First interview on the club channels. What did you make of it?
Well, I mean, somebody liked it. We're in our office. I don't know if that's coming through loud and clear. That was a huge round of applause. Certainly wasn't for us two, that's for sure. More like boos. But thrown me that. Jose Cordoba, it looks to me quite an exciting addition. You know, you do get sent a lot of these PR type emails, and I got a random one yesterday from some sort of data science operation who have crunched whatever database of numbers that they have and thousands and thousands of player profiles and have told me that he will offer. Don't ask me how I know, but they forecast he will add 2.4 points to Norwich's tally from last season, just his mere presence, and that he's apparently the 7th best centre back in the Championship before a ball's kicked. So make of that what you will, but everything about his profile, his background, his athleticism, and the size of him as well, and his age as well, particularly, you've got to be excited because it feels like the first signal for what Thorpe and Napa are all about, which is moving in to quote them, a new direction. And he is the visible representation of that. You know, a young, albeit, you know, played at a reasonable level for a big club in Bulgarian football. He's come across from Central South America and had a little go in Spain. Didn't quite work for him, but at the age he is now, with the experience he's already got, you've got to think the curve's only going one way, and hopefully Norwich will feel the benefit of that. And, you know, push it over to Sam now, who's doing a piece for tomorrow in print. But it feels like it's 1+. So there's an interesting debate already now for me in terms of who starts alongside him. Does Thorpe go more the experienced angle with Hanley and Duffy? Or does he go the other way and really go bold? And you've got obviously then come into the equation Hills, Tompkinson, Aboh, Idah, Warner. So that, for me, is quite an intriguing development. But there's no doubt whatsoever that this guy will be a staple of the Norwich back line. And I don't know what you think, Sam, but obviously we knew it's not news that he is a Norwich player. We knew he was a Norwich player. But today, with the officially opening of the transfer window, they could rubber stamp that, the final pieces of paperwork, and he is now officially a Norwich player. But given the struggles in that area of the pitch last season, for me, that feels very much like a wheel has turned. And go on, give us your thoughts, Sam.
Yeah, I think it's an important point you make that he's basically, you know, it's quite clear to everyone he's got a starting berth there. As long as there are no serious injuries or issues in pre-season, you spend that amount of money on a player and he's your only left-footed centre-back in the squad. I think it's quite clear to everyone, as you said, that he is going to be an important part of that defensive line. He's going to slot straight in there, and that is quite a lot of faith to having somebody who's never played at Championship level before, probably hasn't played at a level that's especially close to the Championship, really. And that is a little bit of a gamble to take, but there are a lot of signs that are really exciting. Adam mentioned that interview that obviously was his first at the club, and when he was asked about what style of player he was, the defending side of it almost felt like a little bit of an afterthought. He was actually keener to talk about how much he likes being on the ball, how he likes to sort of progress it, and he enjoys that side of the game as well. So I think you can see the principles lining up with what Ben Napa wants tactically and what Thorpe will probably implement tactically. But given the sort of noises that we were already hearing after it was announced that Norwich had agreed a deal to sign him, before obviously it was rubber stamped, I think we all knew that was the sort of player that he was. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, but there is that slight hesitation that for somebody who looks like he's going to be such a staple for Norwich next season, he is really very unproven.
Yeah, of course, that is the first one through the door. You'd imagine the ball's now rolling in sort of the corridors of Carrow Road, and Ben Napper's working hard to make some further additions to Norwich City. There was one link earlier on, I think, or might have been the back end of last week now. Emiliano Marcondes, here he is playing at Carrow Road. I think it was last season in the Carabao Cup. The report from the Football Insider that Norwich was supposedly eyeing him up. Of course, he'd worked previously with Johannes Hoff Torup at Norgeland, of course, played at Brentford and Bournemouth in the Championship and the Premier League, had a spell at Hibs on loan at the end of last season. I know you sort of got into the club, Sam, and it was one that they kind of maybe sort of put to the side a little bit, but given, I suppose, the interesting link between him and Torup, one to watch maybe moving forwards, or one we can maybe put in the category of sort of an agent job, maybe given the connection between the two previously.
Yeah, it does feel quite agent-led, and obviously he's somebody who's now going to be looking for a new club. Didn't really get much of a look in at all at Bournemouth, and hasn't been playing football at an especially high level. I mean, you can see the link between him and Torup, and obviously they worked together last season, but I think in terms of the profile of player, he's not necessarily what Napper will be looking for this summer. You know, we've already spoken about that sort of ideology, and although it feels like he might be able to fit into a decent possession-based side, as he did at Norgeland last season, a 29-year-old free agent doesn't feel especially like maybe the sort of business Napper will be keen to do. And of course, those are the names that will crop up when you're having to be very frugal, as Norwich will do this summer. But yeah, from what we're told, not one of interest right now, and obviously things can develop and change. But yeah, the last I heard, not one Norwich were actively pursuing.
Imagine the sort of attacking midfield area is going to be sort of quite present, I suppose, in links to Norwich City this coming summer. Paddy, I suppose there's sort of a position there that could be open. Do you expect kind of more of those sort of links to surface maybe in the coming weeks?
Well, midfield generally, Adam, if I'm honest, because we know, well, anybody who's now started to dig beneath what does a Thorup side look like? What did he do at Norgeland? What will he do at Norwich? Massive importance in those midfield areas to be able to progress the ball, to take the ball off back fours, either in front of or in between, and then the ability technically to see the pictures and progress the ball through the third. So I don't think at this stage of the summer, because a lot of what we discuss now, or any time we're doing anything regarding Norwich and what they might be looking for, is a little bit open for conjecture, because Thorup isn't actually through the building, or certainly boots on the ground and starting to work, and that will happen in short order now. And then I think as pre-season rolls round and we start to see a little bit more evidence in terms of the games, a couple of friendlies been announced today, haven't there, earlier on? So for me, then we'll get a clearer sense of what he feels he's already got in the building, and then more importantly, what he feels he might need to add, maybe what is slightly lacking in those key areas. But midfield generally, I think he would look at that area of this squad, knowing how important it is to the type of football he wants to bring to Norwich. And if it isn't a Marcondes per se, then certainly players who have that ability in those midfield areas. But of course, they do have those on the books, and we'll get into him, I'm sure, in short order. But Nunez would be one of those, and wrote a piece on Liam Gibbs last week. Sarah is obviously the main man, Kenny McLean as well. They do have maybe Jakob Sorensen with a clean run of health and fitness-wise. They have those type of midfield profile, but I've seen one or two questions and comments. We'll probably push a few up in due course, but central defensive midfielder, yeah, like Lee's pointed out there. For me, that's probably more, if I'm looking at the midfield stocks and what Thorup maybe needs to prioritise, I would say more CDM, yeah, than necessarily players in the final third who can affect it, because I think they have those on the books at the minute, as was proven last season. It was Kenny McLean, then it was Gabby Zara, then it was Nunez, even Liam Gibbs occasionally. It didn't feel a settled pairing in that front of that back four. And if that is one of the key fundamentals of how Thorup wants to go about it, I could feasibly see them looking at that area of the squad. We know, go back to January, Jonathan Varane was a player they would have liked to do something with and bring in, and he, in terms of profile of player, was a CDM, wasn't he? So, if it isn't to be Varane this summer, that doesn't negate that they probably would like to do something in that area of the squad, I think, holding midfielder.
Yeah, well, of course, we'll speak about Nunez very shortly. But just on people in the building at the moment, there's actually a question, and it's the person I was going to bring up, the latest on Aboh. I mean, you sort of hinted at it a little bit at the end of the last podcast, Paddy, but him as a player, obviously, we know there's a contractual situation ongoing there, sort of got his senior debut sort of back end of last season against Rotherham, under David Wagner. Certainly a player, young. We watched him at Old Trafford in the under-21s, certainly looked like a player that was far too good for that level. Where are we at with him at the moment, and maybe his situation? Is he someone that Norwich can factor in for next season, alone maybe move, or is he going to be leaving completely?
No, by all accounts, it's agreed. All parties are on the same page. I don't think in terms of maybe the paperwork element, they're quite there, which is why it might be next week onwards. But that's actually confirmed. But, unless there's been an 11th hour curveball, then Aboh will be a Norwich player moving forward, which is great news because, again, it chimes with what Thorpe and Napa are trying to do, which is fundamental to their project, develop their own. And he, by a long stretch, looked probably the best out of the development crop last season. Of course, there's the imponderables. You don't know if they step up and they can handle that. And with that in mind, I think he'd probably be one they would look to get out on loan, maybe in an Abu Kamara style, Brad Hills, get the right loan at the right level of the Football League and then see if he can really handle a step up because we just don't know. He looks better. He looks like he's outgrown development football if you look at the goals he scored, but also how he carried himself on the pitch. You referenced that Old Trafford game. He just looked a cut above, really, in terms of that grade of football. So get him out on loan next season. And then if it all went to plan, maybe 12 months on, we're where Abu Kamara is right now, which is coming back as a League One title winner, played lots of football, produced lots of goals and contributions to goals. And he could be one feasibly, if he has a good pre-season, who is in and around Norwich's first team squad, maybe even the starting 11. So that probably, I think, would be the roadmap with Aboh. By all accounts, Norwich have really shown their commitment to him and his advisors. It's a very good deal, certainly as good a deal as he could have got at this stage of his career. And it's good from his point of view, for me, that he maybe sees in Thorpe particularly, but Napa as well, an environment where, no, I will get a chance here. It might not be immediately next season. I might have to go out and prove myself. But if I do that, there is a pathway to Norwich's first team. And I guess, given what hasn't really happened in the last season or two, contrasted to, the way that Farker and Webber blooded Aarons, Jamal, that cohort, Ben Godfrey, Todd to a lesser extent. If you're a young player at Norwich now, you must feel under this management duo, you're going to get an opportunity. And Aboh signing a new deal imminently is a clear indicator of that. So that's a very good piece of news, I think, all round.
Yeah, Paddy sort of touched on it there, Sam, sort of maybe the Thorpe influence potentially on Aboh. Do you think that probably is the big driver behind this? At one point it looked like it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to be leaving the Carrow Road door this summer. I think it's probably an exciting piece of news for Norwich fans because he feels like one that, has got a lot of hype around him.
Yeah, I think, we were hearing noises that across the board, really, academy players were starting to worry about the pathway under David Wagner, and there was definitely an issue there, as was well documented. So I think that's definitely made a difference, not only Wagner going as somebody who maybe hasn't put as much of an onus on developing youth in his career, but also somebody like Thorpe, who's known across Europe for being able to develop young players. I think that will obviously have played a key part. As Paddy mentioned, it's a very good deal that he's been offered as well. So obviously that will have been a considerable factor in it. But as far as Norwich trying to attract the best young players and keep the best young players going forward, I think we spoke about it quite a lot under Wagner, in that could be an issue for Norwich going forward, and for Ben Napa trying to sign these good young players with potential and trying to sort of grow your own talent. In that sense, that he was almost being undermined by what was happening on the pitch with the first team. And now, we've spoken before, and I spoke on the last podcast about the sort of alignment that there feels there is now in the club. And Thorpe is somebody who, in his role as head coach, will point in the same direction in terms of the importance of youth. And I think the players will have noticed that. Probably their agents will have noticed it as well. And as Paddy said, throw in the quality of the contract they've offered him, and it would have been difficult for him to say no. So that also tells you how big a priority it is for them going forward now, especially, given how tight they'll have to keep the purse strings this summer. they obviously see Aboh as a huge talent, and they see keeping those key young talents as a big part of how the club's going to operate going forward.
Yeah, just staying on the theme of sort of academy players, one that was out on loan last season, Brad Hills. I mean, sort of had a really good spell down there at Accrington. I think there was a fairly unreliable link this morning suggesting he was sort of being linked to a move to Stevenage on loan. Paddy, you sort of got an update from sort of some individuals within the club about him and maybe what his pathway is going to look like this sort of upcoming season. Just want to map out sort of his situation at the moment and sort of maybe one to watch, maybe I suppose moving forwards further on into pre-season.
That is the key, Adam. Yeah, pre-season, I think, will be the deciding factor for players like Hills, maybe Kellen Fisher, Tompkinson, Idah. Does Thorpe, Riddlesholme, Napa feel that they're sufficiently along the pathway that they can come in and affect Norwich's first team squad next season? Or having seen them up close, maybe not quite at the level yet, in which case I can see probably more going out again than stay, because it is an ask to push through 5 or 6 all at the same time. I couldn't see that necessarily from the start of next season, but that's very much the message with Brad Hills, that he will come back in pre-season and then the floor is his. If he impresses Thorpe enough in pre-season, building on what he did at Accrington, played nearly 50 games. He was their player of the year, but that was League Two. This is Championship and a club with aspirations to go higher. So, he will need to prove that he is able to handle that step up and convince the manager. And if he does, then he will be part of the first team squad, as it's been communicated to me. If that isn't quite the case at this stage, or by the back end of the summer, then, clubs like Stevenage, why wouldn't you be looking at him? They're League One. They've looked at a player who was a standout in League Two and a young player who's only going to get better. I can't confess to know Stevenage's style of play, but if he fits that profile, then a Stevenage scale club in League One, I think, would be probably a very good step for him. So, but in terms of, he's lined up for a loan, that very much isn't the case at this stage. Him, Tompkinson, Warner, Aboh, Fisher, they will all, come back in pre-season, and their primary goal will be to impress the management, to say, no, I'm actually close enough to your first team plans that don't let me out of the building, keep me here. And it'll be interesting how that shakes down, because, as I say, I don't think it's reasonable or feasible to expect all of those players will be in and around Norwich's first team squad. But certainly, because again, going back to what we just discussed with Ken Aboh, it's where we are now with Norwich moving forward. They've appointed a head coach who has built his reputation on young players and bringing through young players. So if that's the case, he's going to want some raw material to work with from the start of next season. So it's a great opportunity for many of those young players now. And obviously Aboh, Kellen Fisher and Brad Hills just come off the back of playing for England at under-20s level. What a feather in the cap for them and for their football club. They'll go away now, well-deserved break, and then come back into the building in the next few weeks and try and impress again, because under this head coach, it feels like there's an opportunity for any young player who's good enough at Norwich.
A player who's still relatively young, of course, made more of an impact, I suppose, in the second half of last season. There were some links yesterday suggesting he might potentially be one that's subject to interest. Here he is, Marcelino Nunez. There were some reports, or multiple reports really, from Turkey yesterday suggesting that Trabzonspor had submitted a €3.5 million bid for Marcelino Nunez. I think it's 5 goals, 5 assists throughout his spell so far within the I suppose playing for Norwich City. Boys, what do you make of those links? Obviously look at his profile as a player. He feels like someone that could potentially suit what Norwich are trying to do moving forwards and sort of the new direction. But then we also know the other caveat is Norwich need to raise funds this summer. So, is he one to watch?
Maybe if the fees get quite considerably higher. I mean, you look at the likes of Adam Idah, who I'm sure we'll come on to, and who there's already been comments about, and the amount that he might raise as somebody who last season was Norwich City's third choice striker, somebody who maybe even they could do without this season. Obviously, he's somebody who they'll assess as well, but you look at the numbers they can get for somebody who wasn't even part of the group in the second half of the season. They aren't going to be selling somebody who was starting week in, week out for €3.5 million. He's 24 years old. He's a key player for Norwich. He's a Chilean international who clearly has a huge amount of raw talent. I think 3.5 million euros is almost insulting, to be honest, if that was the bid. And it also doesn't even represent profit for Norwich when you consider all of the funds that they've put into developing that South American program, all the effort that they've gone through to do that. To then extract somebody from a fairly obscure league in Chile for what is quite a significant fee given the level of that league, and then to not make a profit on that player, I think is just a non-starter for Norwich with their model and the way that they work. So maybe he is a player to watch if there is sort of global interest. But I think as far as Trabzonspor, and if that's all that they can afford to offer for Nunez, I wouldn't say that's especially likely to happen, because you're looking at least 3 or 4 times that to get close to, I think, what anyone would agree he's worth, especially considering the fact that not only has he been a key player for Norwich previously, but also, as you said, he seems to fit what Thorpe will want from his players really, really well, and could actually be a key player. He's improved a lot since he arrived at Carrow Road. That journey seems to be continuing in the right trajectory. And I don't think this really would represent much of a good thing in any way for Norwich if the deal went through at numbers around that. But I wouldn't worry especially about that, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know about you, Paddy. Where would you?
No. Everything you say there is how I would see it. The reports were that basically that they'd got short shrift, effectively read between the lines from Norwich, and were told to go away and come back with something considerably more appealing in terms of figures. And why wouldn't they? Because for everything Sam's mapped out there, 3.5 for him, with what he started to show there towards the end of last season. As Bish says there, maybe not quite as high as that, but certainly somewhere in between for me would be a starting point for negotiations. There's absolutely no way Norwich are going to be trading that player for that amount of money. So, I mean, there was a fresh report in Turkey today that the Trabzon, or the people in and around Trabzon, would be pretty confident they could agree something with the player. But that's all well and good. He's under contract, and unfortunately, it's Norwich who hold the cards on that one. So there is no way on earth Marcelino Nunez will be leaving for Turkey for 3.5 million euros or any other currency, pounds, lira, whatever. But so the ball is very much in their court. But as we've discussed here, I wrote a piece yesterday, and we'll probably get onto him as well, because he falls into the category Adam Idah. That's before you even get to the crown jewels, the real saleable assets. Every player in that squad will have their price this summer. And, if it reaches price points that Norwich feel represent fair value, then players potentially could leave. And I'm not sure Thorpe from a footballing point of view would want to lose Nunez, but he might look at it, and if the money's right, and feel that he's a player they could lose and still progress forward in terms of what he's trying to do with building a side. But because let's be honest, he wasn't an out-and-out frontline player. I mean, let's draw a parallel with Zara. He wasn't Zara's influence on Norwich last season over the entire piece of the season. He had some good spells, but there was other games where he was well off it. So I don't think you're losing a frontline player in Nunez, but by the same token, it would seem very short-sighted, both financially and from a footballing point of view, if they were to let him go this summer for that amount of money.
Yeah, can you see sort of that move being of interest to him as a player? I know you sort of mentioned that the club maybe feel that they could tempt him as a player, but Turkey champion, I think they might be in Europa League football, I think, next season, so they have a chance to play in Europe. Can you see that being of interest to him personally, or maybe staying at Norwich and sort of being part of this rebuild that they're trying to do under Ben Napper and Johannes Hoff? Torp, is that maybe more appealing to him as a player?
What do you think, son?
I think there are definitely elements of it that would appeal. I mean, as you said, there's European football on offer potentially, and a league where I think financially players are compensated fairly well as well. The league isn't terrible, but as far as actual progression, and I think Nunez will obviously want to be playing at a higher level than Norwich City in the Championship in his career. I think Trabzonspor feels like a bit of a sideways step at a really important time in his career. At 24, that's when you really want to be making those steps up to the top level. And quite a lot of players go to Turkey, and although they might be having a good time and they might enjoy it there's not much focus on it, and it's almost, you can almost sort of fall away a little bit. I think we've all known of those English players where you're speaking to somebody and they say, "Oh, did you know he was playing in Turkey?" And you sort of can forget about players if they're in a bit more of a remote environment there. Whereas, clubs in the Premier League, clubs abroad in the better leagues will be looking at the Championship as a hotbed of talent that you can poach for good prices and can catch on the way up. And I think if Nunez wants the attention from those bigger clubs in sort of top 5 leagues rather than maybe your Turkeys, I think Norwich is a pretty good place to be. But, for reasons you outlined, there are definitely positives to it. And as Paddy said, there's confidence on the club side that they could strike an agreement with him. And it all comes down to the individual at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think he could be persuaded. But as far as sort of my own opinion, I don't think that would be a great move for his career in the long term.
Yeah, you mentioned him already, Paddy. Adam Idah, there feels like there's sort of rumours around him almost daily at the moment and maybe his future and where it lies. I think there's been sort of figures maybe quoted around the sort of £6 to £8 million mark. There's sort of been lots of articles around his sort of opinion, I suppose, and where maybe he wants to see his future. Where are we at with him at the moment as a player? Is he someone that you can see being in the building for pre-season and someone Norwich will assess, or do you think his heart's maybe with Celtic, and if that move transpires before then, that that could be something that he could be tempted away by?
Both, if I'm honest. I can see him back here for pre-season, just in terms of the logistics of how these things roll on. I mean, it's worth reiterating the window is open today. It doesn't close now until August the 30th. I haven't double checked, but I'm assuming that would be the same in Scotland as well. So that's looking down at today's date. That's over 2 months, 2.5 months or so. And a lot can happen in that period. And there's absolutely no doubt he would. If he had to do it, he'd probably walk to Glasgow because he clearly loved it. The comments last few days ago when he was away with the Republic squad preparing for a friendly in Portugal was a player who was still absolutely buzzing with and why wouldn't you? You can imagine playing in front of that crowd every other week and winning trophies and contributing as he did, to a league and cup double for a club that is close to him and his family's heart as well. That is a very appealing prospect, and I'm sure he would want more of that. And it's no disrespect to Norwich, and he was very respectful to Norwich in his comments about how they've given him his chance and then put him on this path. But maybe he feels that he's probably outgrown them to a degree, and certainly the opportunity to play for a club as big as Celtic with their global appeal would be, I could see something he would want to explore. But it comes back down to the contractual situation. He has 4 years left. The power resides with Norwich. They played a fairly tough hand in January when the likes of Verona were trying to pick him off for €3.5 million in terms of the buy option. And if that was the case in January, you roll it on now, and he has been a factor in Celtic winning a league and cup double and the extra profile that's brought to him. And there's absolutely no doubt. I think anything south of 6 million isn't going to get the deal done. But speaking to Norwich people earlier in the week, and they don't. It's not like they have a figure in mind, and clubs need to get it. And if they do, then everything will flow into place. I think they're quite relaxed about the situation. Thorpe probably does want to have a look at him, because why wouldn't you want a player of his age profile, potential goal scoring impact, and see if he could be reintegrated into your plans? Because if we're talking in sort of 6 to 8 million ballpark, you let him go, then you're probably going to have to spend a few quid to try and replace somebody with that potential, which it is still with him. He's not the finished article yet. So, but everything, if you stack it all up and look at it, it probably does point to him departing, and it's now just the horse trading of Celtic or whoever reaching the valuation Norwich feel he's worth. And I think if clubs could get up around the 8 million mark, I think they would all shake hands and with the attendance sell-on clauses, and the deal would be done. And if you're Adam Idah, you're probably desperate for that club to be Celtic. But as I say, reiterate, we're 2.5 months into this saga now that is the transfer window, so a lot can happen. He may come back in and Thorpe, decides, no, I want this guy in my 11, and that was ultimately the trigger back in January. It wasn't that he was per se frustrated with Norwich and everything to do with Norwich. He was just frustrated at his lack of game time, and he wanted regular football. And you could argue, well, he didn't get regular football at Celtic, but clearly he got enough football to for him to feel that it's something he wants to explore again. But if Thorpe could sell him that vision, then who knows? But I think if you were to put me on the spot right here, right now, Adam Idah won't be part of Norwich City's championship season. I think he will be gone, and Celtic's his likely destination.
Yeah, is there a twinge of disappointment that it hasn't really worked out for him, Sam? When he sort of broke on the scene at Preston and scored that hat-trick, I think there was sort of a lot of hope that he was going to develop into a first-team player for Norwich and someone that would score quite a lot of goals. Just hasn't really happened, really. He's sort of always been in reserve to Pukki, and then there's been Sargent sort of breaking in and doing what he's done. From his part, does it feel like now is the time to really make that permanent move somewhere and a fresh start?
Yeah, I think there are a few different strands in terms of whether it's a disappointment overall. And yes, if you had told me, 5 years ago when he burst onto the scene as an 18-year-old, scored a hat-trick in the FA Cup and looked like somebody who was going to go on and play at Premier League level, then hopefully with Norwich for a long time to come, then him being sold off to Celtic 5 years later without ever really achieving the potential that I think everyone saw in him, that might have felt like a negative, but equally there's been a lot of water flowed under the bridge since then. And every opportunity he's had, really, every time we've been talking up this big chance for Adam Idah to make it about himself, he hasn't really done it. And he has just fulfilled this sort of super sub role. And I think there's been a reason for that. When you consistently get the opportunities to start and to really show what you're capable of and you can't quite do it, then I think at some point after that's happened enough times, you have to resign yourself to the reality that it probably isn't going to work to the extent that that everybody wanted. And he had an opportunity as recently as Josh Sargent's injury to really show what he was about. And even then, he got a couple of goals sort of when he was starting. I think there were 2 against Plymouth when the game was already gone. But he didn't really offer enough to get close to replacing the American. And that's why Norwich were so much worse without him than when he came back. So I think now, with all the context that's gone by, it feels like it probably is the right time. And actually, it should be viewed as a success in the long term, really, because how many academy players are you able to raise millions of pounds in funds from? Most of them end up having a couple of loans out to non-league clubs, maybe going to lower in the EFL, and then after a few years without any first-team appearances, leave the club, and some of them don't even make a career in professional football. So overall, for an academy product, getting the sort of money that Norwich probably will command if Idah leaves the club this summer, I think has to be seen as a success. But yeah, if you had told me this a few years ago when it was all about potential and he looked really, really exciting, it might have been slightly disappointing, yeah.
Yeah, Bish making a good comment there. I wonder how different Idah's Norwich career could have been if it had a loan spell, similar to the Bali Mumbas and Abu Kamaras of the world, and gained a bit of confidence from that. Staying on the theme of strikers, I see a few comments around Josh Sargent. Obviously, nothing really tangible in terms of links yet, but there's obviously going to be interest inevitably in him this summer. Luke saying with Sargent's persistent injury concerns, do you think now is the good time to cash in while his stock is high if there's interest, or maybe he needs a good rest? I mean, obviously he's been withdrawn from the US squad for a few games. I mean, that seems to still be an issue, Paddy, that the injury aspect, it's still sort of lingering there at the moment. Luke's question there, sort of what would your response be to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's 2 parts to it. It is the fitness and injury element. And I think, obviously, he's missed these 2 friendlies, but those friendlies were in preparation for a home Copa America. And I think the squad lists have got to be in by the next day or 2, 15th of June, I think. So we'll know one way or the other definitively if Josh Sargent is of a fitness level that he can, go into a tournament for his country this summer. If not, then that's probably good in the short term for Norwich in terms of he does get that rest it feels like he needs now without going back through the catalogue of this year, really. He's not been right, not been able to train fully week in, week out. David Wagner availed us of that months after he came back in January. Then he breaks down towards the end of the playoff semi-final first leg against Leeds. He's able to play the first half, but that doesn't re-emerge after half-time. He has that great chance. We all can remember the Meslier chip, and he didn't look right that game and didn't re-emerge. And now he's gone off with his country, and of course, they have a home World Cup, in 2 years' time. He wants to be part of that. And it feels it's probably not in Norwich's best interests at the minute, that he's flogging himself a little bit. But if he isn't in the squad, then hopefully that would mean that he can get the required. And by all accounts, there's a lot of dialogue going back and forth between Norwich's medical staff and their counterparts in the US setup. So I think there is a coordinated joint treatment plan there. We don't know if it is the ankle, or we just keep, the reports are from the US end that it's a foot issue that is flared up again. So, but it feels like it probably would be connected to the ankle issues he's had. So, first and foremost, he needs to get himself fully fit, fully firing, and that might have a knock-on impact in terms of the second part of that is the transfer situation. Because if you're a club looking at him and probably thinking a striker with his goal record, I mean, what was it, 18 goal contributions in the 26 or so games he was available last season? That's phenomenal ratio. And again, with his age profile, he's only going to go one way in the next few years. It probably starts 20 million plus. Now, if you're a mid to lower end Premier League club looking at having to outlay that amount of money for a player with, let's be honest, fitness issues this calendar year at least, then it's probably going to raise some question marks and some flags. So, it might be in Norwich's interest that maybe that is the case and that he stays in the building and Norwich get another year of him. Because can you imagine what he would do a fully fit 9-10 months of just Sargent in the Championship based on the smallish sample last season? So personally, I would hope he would be one that they could keep. But along with Rowe, along with Zara, he is probably they are the three most saleable assets. And, in an ideal world, it might be out of Norwich's hands if he's the one that a mid to lower end Premier League club looks at, or maybe a club abroad looks at, and are willing to pay 20+ million, then it's very, very hard to turn down that sort of money. And as always with these scenarios, what does the player want? Do these players want another season of Championship football if there are potential to go to the Premier League, to go to maybe a high-profile league in Europe? So, I mean, again, we might get into Zara, we might get into Rowe, but of those three, if I was to rank them, I'd think he's probably the least likely of those three to go this summer. But that isn't to say that, there won't be interest. I think the Leeds thing will probably die down now. The fact that they didn't go up financially, I'm not sure they could put a deal of that scale together. So, there is Daniel Farke, we know, admires the player. He was the one who, along with Webber, brought him in originally. So I'll be less concerned about that. But, there were links in January around Brentford. And of course, if Ivan Toney moves on, they might be looking for a sort of a number 9, more traditional out-and-out type of striker, which he would fit that profile. So I guess it's one of those, it's the pieces of the jigsaw. If other clubs sell their strikers and are looking for strikers, why wouldn't you look at a player who's done what he did in the Championship last season with that caveat that there's no concerns left over his fitness issues, which I guess we'll get another signal, as I say, in the next day or two. If he's fit and available and he's named in the Copa America squad, then that would suggest that hopefully the worst of the fitness elements around him and his story are behind us. But you'd have to think he probably is in the balance, because if you've not been fit for these two friendlies, can you take a risk on him if you're the US head coach? So as I say, that'll become clear in the next day or two, as will his transfer status. But I'll be more relaxed about him still being here when the season kicks off than I would a John Rowe, that's for sure.
Yeah, we'll be live for another sort of 15 minutes or so. So any more comments, questions, get them down below and we'll work round to those. Paddy, I know you also got an update on Tzolis and this sell-on clause in the week. Obviously the sale went through a couple of weeks back now. I think there was maybe a twinge of disappointment from some Norwich fans that they obviously, Fortuna Düsseldorf exercised that option and maybe he went for a little bit less value than maybe a lot would have hoped that they would have got for him. But I think you sort of got more of a percentage and maybe what Norwich could expect as a cut from his sale.
Yeah, I mean, the sense is that they're probably in line for around about 10% of a buy of a sale, and not to draw a parallel with like Madison and those type of deals. It's not a percentage of the sell-on profit; it's just a percentage of the sale. So, reported in the German media that there's a 6 million release clause now in this Fortuna contract, but it has to be exercised by July the 15th. In other words, potential suitors want to take him. There's lots of clubs in the Bundesliga being touted with him. And again, much like Sargent and his numbers, Sarah and his numbers, Tzolis in Bundesliga 2 last season, he was off the dial. Was it 29, I think, goal contributions, something of that nature in about 30-odd early 30s appearances. So if I'm a Bundesliga club, I'm thinking that's probably worth a punt, €6 million. And if that was the case, then work it out, 10% of that. In an ideal scenario, that deadline comes and goes, and then because you would think then if there could be an auction around him later on in the summer with Bundesliga clubs, then that price point would be north of €6 million. And of course, the more inflated that price goes, the better it is for Norwich, on top of the €3.5 million they got in the original deal. So, there was a lot of criticism maybe around that Norwich seemingly had their hands tied a few weeks ago, but that deal and the elements of that deal were put in place last summer. All the parties agreed to it. And now we'll roll it on from here. But yeah, I think if you're Norwich, then you probably want that deadline to come and go, and then in the hope, because I've seen a few bits in terms of Fortuna, and they need to sell now to do what they need to do in terms of their squad makeover. They just missed out in rather painful fashion in terms of Bundesliga promotion. 3-0 up in the first leg against Bochum, was it, and then 3-3 in the second leg, lost on penalties. So they need to refresh their squad. He, along with, I think it's a centre back, their most saleable assets, and it felt like, reading some of the media from the Dusseldorf end, that they will need to sell to do what they need to do. So I don't see, and the player himself had made it quite clear, didn't he? He doesn't want another season in Bundesliga too. So he will move on this summer. It's just whether it's this side of that 6 million release clause or the other side. And if it is the other side, then hopefully Norwich's percentage windfall is a little bit more than it probably looks like at this stage. But it just, I guess, zooming out a touch, it just underlines, the vagaries of recruitment, because when he came in and the money they paid for him, you thought here's a player with a reputation who could really impact it. It didn't happen for Norwich, but he found an environment in Germany, in Bundesliga 2 and at Fortuna, where he just blossomed and has now got himself back in the Greek squad and looks like, if it's to be believed, he's going to be in the Bundesliga next season. And you just don't know. He might kick on again. So going right back to when he first came in the building and Sargent came in that summer, it might not have been right for Norwich in the here and now, but doesn't necessarily mean it was bad recruitment. It just wasn't right at that time, and the players weren't right, and maybe the adaptation wasn't quite right as well. So, I guess that's where you're hoping Napa and Thorpe can get it right now. That the calls they make, and Cordoba's the first one, they get more right than wrong, because if you're a club with Norwich's financial wherewithal and financial model, that has to be the case. You have to get more right than wrong, because if you don't, then we've seen what happens.
Yeah, before we dip into a few more comments, just want to sort of talk a little bit about the Mark Attanasio situation at the moment. Obviously, it's sort of maybe veers away a little bit from transfers, but obviously he hasn't impacted in the strategy of Norwich moving forwards. There was sort of some links and rumours that he was maybe one of these that was potentially joining an investment group, his group partially looking to buy into Benfica. Just that situation there. I mean, what do you make of that? Is that something that's a starter, a non-starter, or are we a little bit undecided on where we are with that at the moment? And maybe how would that impact Norwich if that was something of that nature to go through?
Yeah, I think reports in Portugal have been a bit divided. There's been some suggesting, or maybe some American reports suggesting that is true, that Attanasio is interested in buying, I think, a 25% stake in Benfica. But there have been reports from Portugal that that's nonsense as well. So I suppose that's a situation that we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But it would feel quite random to just randomly pick a sort of a shareholder in Norwich City and say that they wanted 25% of Benfica. So yeah, definitely a situation worth watching. I suppose the comfort from a Norwich perspective is that he isn't actually sort of doing things day to day at Norwich anyway. Obviously, he's very involved, and we've heard from various figures at the club about how much sort of advice he's giving and things like that. But he's not at the training ground. He's not even in England a lot of the time. So even if his interests were a little bit divided and he had things elsewhere, you'd say he probably would not take that much time out of Norwich City and how much he was giving them. But right now it is quite hard to say without sort of hearing more about that and hearing him talk about his priorities. But as I said, reports in Portugal have said that it's not true, so it could yet end up amounting to nothing. But it's definitely an interesting situation, and I can understand the concern from Norwich fans, because obviously that would suggest that maybe he isn't getting what he wants. from Carrow Road, but he's sort of a serial investor who has his fingers in loads and loads and loads of pies. So that might be a little bit of comfort. But yeah, probably a situation we'll have to watch play out and see how it could affect things at Norwich. But equally, it's not like Johannes Thorup going and coaching another team. It's somebody who isn't constantly involved, and that maybe makes it slightly easier for him to invest in other things if he wants. But I think Paddy sort of got a little bit of an update on that and maybe where things are with that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Norwich City are concerned, I think they're fairly relaxed about it. I think there's been nothing communicated to them that there is any legs in this, but that's not to say that there haven't been exploratory informal discussions. If you take it right back, his first interaction with Norwich was a private shareholder transaction with Michael Folger and his family. So, that's a well-worn path. But right here, right now, he's very much, him and his group, Norfolk Holdings, are very much plugged in financially, and the debt reallocation or reassignment underlined that, the shareholder mix, but also day-to-day. I was told when Thorup was announced that actually that week Ben Napper and one or two other senior execs were actually out in Milwaukee meeting with their counterparts, meeting no doubt with the Atanasio. So, the ties are very tight. Atanasio, I think, and his group were very supportive in terms of the Cordoba deal. That wasn't, as it was told to me, basically they got the money in for Tzolis. They got the money out the door for Cordoba. Cordoba would have happened irrespective of Tzolis. And I think the support from the American end was key to that. So there's absolutely nothing in the ether that suggests, as I saw it off the back of these stories last weekend, that he's got cold feet. He's not happy with the timescale or the rate of potential shareholder boardroom dynamic shift. All that's for the birds. He's clearly very invested on every level. And you only have to look at how he incrementally increased his influence at the Brewers, and he's been there 18, 19 years and counting now. So, yeah, I'd be fairly relaxed about it from a Norwich perspective. And, if it turns out it's Benfica or whoever else in terms of football club, I don't think that's a negative for Norwich. If anything, there may be some positives to be had in terms of sharing of players and what have you. So, but that's as I say, very hypothetical. In here and now, there's nothing from Norwich's perspective that one would need to be worried about those stories, I think.
Yeah, we'll dip into the comments for sort of the last 10 minutes or so. Mark Larter on YouTube saying, any news on Chris Willock and Martin Fraser? Of course, Fraser is the Norwich left back who's been linked to Norwich on a free. Of course, worked with Johannes Thorup before. Chris Willock, I think there was a links a couple of months back now, out of contract at QPR, so will be available on a free transfer. Given that Norwich are sort of operating in a market where they're probably not going to have lots of money to spend, anything in those two or any updates on where we are with those two?
Yeah, the Willock one is interesting because it's gone basically completely quiet from very early on in the summer. I think that link came about originally, didn't it? I think it's one that would make sense. Pretty decent age, looks like a decent player. And when we've seen him play for QPR against Norwich, I've actually liked the look of him. He has maybe looked a little bit like he might be in the sort of Ono Hernandez mode, where it sort of applies to a lot of Championship wingers and players, where it's a lot of a lot of threatening without maybe that much end product. But he does look like a player with decent potential, homegrown. I think mid-20s at the moment, so that would make sense. But yeah, it does seem to have gone pretty quiet on that. Not any updates that I can share on it. But yeah, Paddy, I don't know if you want to take Martin Fraser.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a player Thorup worked with, likes a lot. Would like to bring him here. Norwich need left backs. They let two go. There's Montoya in the development ranks, but the reality is they probably do need to bring in definitely one and possibly two. But by all accounts, he does have a lot of offers across Europe. He's obviously of an age, and in terms of experience that he has popped up on the radar of many clubs. The fact he's a free agent financially, that would make him very attractive, I'm sure, to a lot of clubs. I've seen reports of Italy and clubs in Italy. But is he going to be first choice if he goes into a top 5 league? I don't know. He's not in the Danish squad. I'm very keen to check that the other day, and he's not in their Euros squad. So we're not talking in terms of an out front rank top 5 league left back. So that might work in Norwich's favour, because that head coach, I'm sure, would like to work with that player again. He was a key figure for him in Northland's team in the last season or so that he's been working as a head coach there, and time will tell, really. But, with the greatest respect, he might look at the Championship and feel, maybe he can, at this stage of his career, wants to try himself at a little bit of a higher level. So that is one I could see happening, but I wouldn't want to say that it's it's moving to anything like a conclusion. I think there's a lot of interest in that player, and Norwich will have to be, even with the Thorpe link, they would have to be very persuasive, I think, to get him to England, to get him to the Championship.
Yeah, Ethan asking when are the players set to return for pre-season?
Testing 28th of June, I think, which is a Friday from memory. So 2 weeks today, is it? Maybe, yeah. And then obviously the non-international contingent, or the non-Euros contingent, from the following Monday, they'll be in, and that will be it. I'll be Thorpe and Riddisholm in the building, and on we go, lads. And obviously the first, I think, pre-season game was announced today, wasn't it? It was at 9th, is it Stevenage? We got that right way around, yeah. So end of the month for testing, and then start of July building up into that Stevenage game.
Chris Sadler on YouTube. I guess City need to make a large transfer profit this close season. Will that put pressure on the manager to sell before he buys, or will it be a late flurry? I know you done a piece yesterday, Paddy, sort of more outlining where we are at the moment in terms of the transfer window. In terms of Chris's question there, sort of how would you sort of market it, I suppose, as Norwich moving forwards into this window now?
Well, certainly the first part, that would seem to be the given, that as David Wagner mapped out this time last summer, whatever they did in terms of trying to improve a squad who finished 13th, they were to a degree hamstrung by having to bring in 20 plus million in profit. I wouldn't want to put a figure on it, but I think that will have to be the case again, because obviously we're 12 months on and there's no parachute money on the balance sheet now. So we saw the situation in the last set of published accounts. The latest set of accounts will be out at the end of this month. I don't think the picture is necessarily going to be any healthier, because it's another season of Championship football and Championship revenues. So, yes, I think they will have to generate funds, and that is why I'm pretty certain one of Rowe, Sarah or Sargent will have to be sold, maybe more if the planets align. And I don't think it'll be a case that tens of millions of pounds will then be diverted into Thorpe's transfer kitty. I think it's very much now post Cordoba going to be about frees, going to be about loans, and then maybe they might be able to do a little bit of business, but it'll be certainly, I couldn't see them going beyond what they paid for Cordoba now, if I'm honest, if they do any actual buying of players, just because of the financial picture that they're working within. So I don't think necessarily his hand is forced and it'll have to sell, because as we've spent discussing this over the last nearly an hour or so, it's not just Rowe, it's not just Zara, it's not just Sargent. Adam Idah, there's going to be interest. Nunez, there's clearly interest. There may be other players who start to attract interest as well. So, there's a lot of moving parts at this stage, and it's still very early in the summer. But I'm pretty sure any players that Thorpe feels he wants or feels are integral to what he's trying to do, I'm sure if you're Ben Napper, you're going to try and facilitate that. And then the actual transfer side of surpluses will have to come from other areas. But, I'm sure they're both very realistic individuals, and they will know. And I'm sure those conversations have been had that what needs to happen this window in terms of two-track improving the squad, but actually as well generating revenue, and not for putting back into the transfer kitty, but actually, those day-to-day running costs of a club who are, again, in the Championship with no parachute payments.
Yeah, Neil really wants some inside source here. Have any of you boys been offered a new deal? Have any of you two had a new contract on the table at all this summer?
To do what, Adam?
I was going to say
a job. I don't know. Neil will have to clarify.
If we're open to offers, we're very happy to. If there's that, we don't have any loyalty to the pink. And
I've always operated a highest bidder policy. So if anyone wants to come in and offer me loads more money, then I'll do it. But we have just both had appraisals, and I wasn't fired, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah. We work on very low bars, don't we? Yeah, we can keep the job we're in. We'll settle for that rather than new deals.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Dan Mayhew saying, any rumours for pre-season games, another German/Dutch tour? I think there was obviously Club Brugge on their side have confirmed that Norwich are going to be heading out to Belgium to face them. I think that's Wednesday, July the 17th. Anything else in the pot, Paddy, in terms of that you can maybe sort of give on the inside for people that want to know?
Well, I mean, as you rightly say, Adam, Norwich haven't confirmed that Bruges game, but I think there might be. I've seen reports that there will be another game in Belgium, and that I think is probably, you can take that as read, that there will be a week out there. I mean, they went to Austria last summer, and they did a sort of 2-part thing again, so that might be in their thoughts as well. And obviously we've got the Magdeburg game. I think there will be another Carrow Road game as well before the season kicks off. I think 10th, isn't it? The weekend of the 10th. So if you just look at the dates available, that would seem to make sense. So, but yeah, I think you can take the Belgian week as read, subject to the club confirming, obviously, on top of the 2 games that they've confirmed already earlier today. So yeah, anybody who's going out to Belgium, then hopefully we'll be out there as well, and we'll be able to see the next stage of the Thorpe revolution.
Paul, quickly, how many players realistically do Norwich need to bring in? Obviously, it's tough probably to put a figure on that until we know who's going out the door, but maybe just for the positions that are open at the moment, and sort of maybe there's slots available. How many players do you roughly feel Norwich need?
I think more than 6 is going to be absolutely necessary. As you said, obviously, a lot will depend on who goes out the door, because the ones that they'll likely be looking at selling and the ones that will have the most suitors are those key players that obviously will need replacing and replacing well. But even before those players are sold, there are some quite clear gaps in the squad. We spoke before about the lack of a left back, even at left centre back. Yes, they've got some players coming back, but I don't think any of those are left-footed, so that might be somewhere they want to strengthen as well. Midfield, people have already mentioned, and none of those are areas where, apart from Gabriel Sara, who maybe is a bit more of an advanced option, it feels likely that players might leave or sort of go to better clubs or bigger clubs. So for me, it's going to be at least 6, probably more than 8 as well. But yeah, it's going to be a big summer for Ben Napper, I think.
And just finally, Paddy, go on.
No, I mean, yeah. Well, yeah, it's hard to say because so many moving parts. If they do lose players from this point onwards, they'd probably have to replace those. We talked about it earlier in the segment on the young players. How many of those go out on loan if they're deemed to be not ready? And if they're deemed to be not ready, do Norwich then need to bring in players? Although that would seem to fly in the face of giving pathways to players and to block their path. I don't know. I'm not sure it'll be as many as 6 to 8. I just think the finances around it, it could be difficult. They might, in an ideal, want to do that, but that feels like a lot of business in one window, and the amount of steps that have to go into any deal getting over a line. That would be quite a prolific summer for Norwich. So I think slightly less than that, but the caveat is at this stage you just don't know. You just don't know in terms of both players who you might deem are not quite ready, or players who the offers come in and then it's too good to turn down, and then you face a situation where you maybe just need, from a headcount point of view, to have to thicken out your squad. So, but I mean, we in due course we will obviously get plenty of touch points hopefully with Thorpe over the summer, and I think I'd be more inclined to just wait and see what his sense is of how big a squad he wants to carry. Some managers like to work with much tighter knit groups of players. Others do like to have players in reserve. So I think once we get a sense of what his preferences are, then you can probably overlay that, what it might mean in terms of the window.
And just finally, before we round off, the Euros start tonight, potentially 3 Norwich City players in action, of course, with Scotland. Are you excited to see those feature, I suppose, on a big stage tonight, but also, an England perspective, is it coming home?
I'm looking forward to watching Scotland tonight and watching that game. I'm interested to see actually if Grant Hanley features, because he's somebody Steve Clarke really rates very highly, but obviously the fitness issues are well documented. There is significant doubt over that, especially in such a huge game against the high quality players Germany obviously have. But yeah, I'll be backing them. I don't have as much dislike for the other home nations as a lot of England supporters seem to have, or as a lot of the other home nations seem to have for England. So yeah, I'll be wishing them well and hoping for some good performances from some Norwich City players. As far as England, it's quite hard to predict. I don't really see them winning silverware as long as Gareth Southgate is in charge. I'm not sure. Maybe he's the man to get the best out of this group. But I'm definitely looking forward to watching some games with my friends, and it's always a really good event to be at one of those games. So hopefully they can get through as many of the knockout stages as possible. But I wouldn't back them to win the final, to be honest. What about you, Paddy?
Yeah, defensively, as people keep saying, it's very hard to see that they have, when you get deep into the tournament, at the back end of it, tight games. Don't think defensively they've got enough about them, really. I think Portugal could go close. I saw their lineup the other night against the Republic, and some of the players they had on the bench, Bernardo Silva and Ruben Neves and Ruben Diaz, the Man City centre-back, who's an excellent player. I mean, I know it's a friendly, but it just gave a sense of the strength they've got in depth. They've obviously still got the main man, and I know most pundits are tipping France, but I think Portugal could go pretty close. But back to the Scotland, I mean, it's just good. I'll go back to was it the previous Euros or the one before, when we had Wes and Robbie Brady, and just to have that Norwich connection. Yeah, just to have that Norwich connection is great, because it reflects well on Norwich at the club. And whether you're pro Scotland doing well or not, I think we'd all want to see those three play, and hopefully Angus will start games, and I think Grant will start. Kenny clearly seems to be using a bit more of a bit part role, but it'd be just great for those guys to go and experience that. I mean, Angus, the piece he did with his dad for BBC Scotland the other day, saying tonight's probably the biggest game of his career, and not alone in that, in the Scotland ranks. And you just hope if it is the case and he is starting, he goes out and has a good one, and really enjoys that experience, because if you're a Norwich fan, surely you want to see your Norwich players going and doing well on a stage as grand as that.
Yeah, we'll see how they get on tonight. Alan just saying, when is Napa? I mean, I'm assuming he's sort of referencing when we'll speak to him. And we're going to get an official unveiling of Johannes Hoff tore up next Friday morning. So Ben Napa will be on that table. So there will be lots of questions posed towards Ben Napa. And also, of course, the new boss is going to be leading this project. And hopefully there'll be plenty more players for us to discuss in terms of transfer rumours as we go through the summer. Thanks for joining us in the last hour or so. Of course, the weekend's here. So enjoy your weekend, enjoy the Euros. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people will be tuning in to watching the games. Whether people are going to watch 3 or 4 games a day is up to them, and what they want to get up to. But plenty of other good content across our channels, of course, as well at the moment. Connor's been doing a bit of a loan series, so we've had a little chat with Adam Idah. We spoke about him in this, obviously, and you got a little bit more of a view there from how he's been getting on with Celtic. Of course, you've got the Pinker Plus app as well, $2.99 a month. You can take out a free trial as well, so that's well worth checking out, particularly going into the summer period. We've kind of hinted that we're going to be at some of these pre-season games, so why not come and give that a try, because we'll be there giving you sort of all the inside stuff out on the tours. So with that, we're going to sign off. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you in the next one.